Hello, AP European History class. It's been a little while since we've discussed the politics of Europe. The last two chapters of your textbook have taken you through the social and economic changes going on in Europe from the 17th to the 18th centuries. You can remember the scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, the Agricultural Revolution, the Consumer Revolution, and then just the continuing changes that are occurring in religion post-Reformation era, all the way from the Catholic Counter-Reformation has already occurred, but it's still occurring. And then you have things like the increased persecution of witches, along with the decreased persecution of witches that followed, all the way to new religions and snake handling and talking personally with God, and just a lot of things that came out of the Protestant Reformation. So Europe is changing a lot, and so is her politics. We've taken a little bit of break from politics, so we need to go back to what is the political landscape in Europe prior to a very important date, which is 1789. 1789 is the start of the French Revolution, which is really groundbreaking and changing for the rest of Europe. So we need to go and look back at the 18th century, 1700s, and see what's happening in Europe. So we're going to take some time to review right now. So to review, the last time we discussed political leaders was when we saw the emergence of absolutist rulers. See Louis XIV and his lovely legs, and the development of the constitutional monarchy with William and Mary, who finally agreed, maybe not like, well, definitely not like anybody else really in Europe, that a constitution was going to be more lasting than they were. And so in 1689, after the Glorious Revolution of 1688, they signed the English Bill of Rights, which put Parliament in charge of the monarchy. Again, this is in England. Obviously, it was very different with Louis XIV and the Fronde and the nobility at the Palace of Versailles. Additionally, we had the Enlightenment occur, and with the Enlightenment, we looked at European leaders who started to improve the lives of their people, but still didn't give them a voice in government. I guess freedom is good, even if you're not able to question your leaders. At least the Chinese today seem to think so. So these enlightened absolutes, as they became to be called, what was nice about them is, for the most part, if you can't remember who they are, just remember that they put the word great after their names and were always sure to pause and smile so that the paintings of them could be made showing all of their improvements. Again, Baroque artists, I'm sure, were well paid for their promo pieces, such as the ones you see before you. So now it's time to talk about diplomacy. And since the 18th century mercantilism saw war as a way to strengthen a country and not really something to be avoided at this time, I guess we're not just talking about diplomacy, we're really just talking about war. So in the 18th century, leading a country was about expansion of power. And as Frederick the Great said, governments should use their power to extend their territories. How are countries to improve their state? Through the centralization of power, increased standing armies, increased taxes to support said armies, increased bureaucracy to collect said taxes to increase said armies, and then war. Because somebody should really use the cool army they created to gather territory and booty from other countries. So in the 18th century, the first major war was the War of Spanish Succession, which lasted from 1701 to 1714. This war was about balancing power and making sure no one country was too strong. This all could have been avoided if Charles II had been less monstrous and spent more time with his wife and fewer hours playing with toys. Again, a cautionary tale against inbreeding. See slide in front of you. Louis XIV wanted his nephew to be the King of Spain and later King of France, uniting the two countries under the Bourbon name. The Austrian Habsburgs wanted the Holy Roman Emperor's Leopold II's son, Charles III of Spain, to be king, but that would unite the Austrian and Spanish Habsburgs and surround France and place us back in the time of Charles V and Charles I, when one man ruled them all. So to avoid one country becoming too powerful, they all fought and made sure power was balanced. In the end, France placed Philip V, Louis XIV's nephew, on the throne, but he had to renounce his claim to the French throne. Also, with the Peace of Utrecht in 1713, which officially ended the war, France lost much of its North American territory to Britain. So I guess it probably wasn't a good idea for Louis XIV to support the claim of Philip V if he was going to lose all that territory. The next war is the war, and here's a picture or a map that shows the War of Spanish Succession. And one of the things you're going to see here is that for the most part, France is kind of surrounded by people who disagree with Louis XIV's claim to the Spanish throne. Even within Spain, there are a lot of people who disagreed with it. So you're going to see where the major battles occurred mostly were very far away from Spain, but in between France and the Holy Roman Empire. But again, England's going to end up, or Britain's going to end up being the major victor because, as you can tell, none of the battles are fought on their land, and then they get some major concessions by getting a lot of the territory in North America from France. All right, so the next war is the War of Austrian Succession, which lasted from 1740 to 1748. Again, the problem is who inherits the throne, but this time in Austria. Thanks, European history people, for naming these wars appropriately. If only the 100 Years' War and the 30 Years' War and later the 7 Years' War were properly named, maybe people in my class who didn't read the textbook would do much better on their tests. So it is more about what gender the person who inherited the throne is in Austria than anything else. Even though Maria Theresa's father, prior to his death, had all of the lands he ruled agree with the pragmatic sanction that Maria Theresa would be able to inherit the Austrian Habsburg land, still those enlightened absolutists who were rarely enlightened when it came to women's issues decided to see just how strong Maria Theresa was. So Frederick the Great of Prussia, note he's an enlightened absolute, attacked and took the Habsburg territory of Silesia, as you can see right here in yellow. And then more countries joined, because what's not to like about going to war? In 1748, with the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle, nothing is really accomplished except that Prussia gets to keep Silesia and Austria and Prussia hate each other. The next and last major war of the 18th century is more than just a political war. It's a war about trade. The 7 Years' War began in 1756 and lasted to 1763 and is really considered one of the first, or maybe the first, World War. Before this war begins, Austria, with the help of Louis XV and his mistress, Madame Pompadour, created an alliance with France, who had long been enemies. This will later be a problem for his heir Louis XVI and his Austrian wife, who French people historically distrust. See War of Spanish Succession and most of the 17th century. Austria, France, and Russia will join together, and Prussia will find a friend in England, who always sides against France. See all wars we've studied since the 100 Years' War. They will fight in 3 major areas during the 7 Years' War, including Europe, India, and North America. This war will end with the Treaty of Paris in 1763. It is a victory for England and either a draw or a loss for all of the other belligerents involved. Russia drops out of the war. Thank you, says Frederick the Great of Prussia to Peter III of Russia. However, when Catherine the Great comes to power in her coup d'etat in 1763, where her lover kills her husband, she threatened to resume hostilities, which may have pushed Prussia to the peace negotiating table earlier than expected. Britain is going to gain control of the Indian trade in India during this time period. Britain is also going to have many victories in North America. After a few failures using only British colonial troops, Britain will send its big guns and William Pitt, who was able to defeat the French with the help of colonial troops and Native American tribes. The Treaty of Paris, again, that was signed in 1763, ended the French and Indian Wars, which is what it was called in North America, and the 7 Years' War is what it was called in Europe. What happens? France is going to lose the rest of its North American territory in including pretty much everything east of the Mississippi, and it's going to lose its territory in India. This war will have a tremendous impact on France and will begin some of its economic and political problems that will lead to the French Revolution. So war helped to expand some countries' power while putting other countries in their place. And while the goal may have been to balance power, at the end of the 18th century, was there really a balance? So you can see here all the areas where fighting occurred and who controlled what during the 7 Years' War. But here in 1763 is kind of the colonial empires. And maybe you can look at this and discuss whether or not it really is balanced. Is power balanced during this time period, or is somebody moving ahead?